Hi, everyone. I'm Celia. I'm the Public Engagement Officer here at the Royal Canadian Institute for Science. Welcome back to another year and another season of exciting science programming. Before we begin, I would like to do a land acknowledgement for the land on which RCI Science operates on. We acknowledge the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As we may have viewers from across Canada and beyond, may we suggest that you research the history of your land using the website and app native-land.ca. So today we have a fascinating and topical panel moderated by Priya Iwarima. We'll have an introduction to exercise by her, followed by 3 short presentations by our experts before they tackle your questions. So please be sure to submit your questions and comments in the chat box on the side or via Twitter at RCI Science. You can also email us at information@rciscience.ca. Please be polite and respectful in your comments. Moderators will be monitoring the chat and will take action as appropriate. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Priya. Priya is a Nigerian-Canadian biomedical engineering student whose research focuses on developing a protocol to generate insulin-producing cells from stem cells as a potential therapy for type 1 diabetes. She is also interested in optimizing processes for large-scale manufacturing of stem cell-derived products. In her free time, she loves traveling to explore new places and cultures, music, eating, and socializing with friends and family. Passionate about achieving and maintaining a healthy and balanced lifestyle, Priya also has experience in this capacity, working with youth and as a fitness model. Welcome, Priya. Thank you so much for being our moderator today.
Thank you, Celia, for that very kind introduction. Welcome, everyone, to this discussion. It's going to be a really exciting day today. As Celia introduced, my name is Priya, and I'm going to be your moderator for the event today. And I thought I would just start off by briefly introducing myself and sort of how I've come to where I am right now. So I'm originally Nigerian and moved here a few years ago. Actually, it's been over a decade now to further my education. And while I was a little young girl, I got introduced to exercise from my sister. And she just happens to be an international athlete at the time that was representing Nigeria for track and field. So she really sparked my love for exercising and really just running around aimlessly as a little child, climbing trees and falling off of them. So that has sort of stuck with me throughout the years. And when I went into university to do my undergraduate degree, I also joined the track and field team where I was specializing in long jump. So I got a lot of, exercise in that was regimented as a varsity member, but also some of the habits that my sister had given me from growing up and enjoying how to exercise. Now, as time moved on and, life got busy, it was very easy for me to fall out of many of those habits that I had already cultivated when it came to exercising and being consistent with my exercising. So I'm really excited today to kind of learn from the experts. What are some of the, current thoughts and research out there on exercise and how it's going to impact your life physically and mentally, and also how to have some impactful habits that will allow us to be consistent with these habits that we want to form, especially now that it's a new year. We've all got those resolutions that we have, new year, new me, and we write a list of so many things down. I am very guilty of that. And a lot of the times, I forget about that list. So I'm really eager to learn some of those tips and tricks on how to really engage myself with some of these goals that I have when they revolve around exercising, particularly in a pandemic, right? A lot of us have pandemic fatigue. We're exhausted from just everything that's going on with the world and with us personally. So I'm excited today to learn from these experts, and I hope that you are excited as well for that. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Mark Tenopolsky. Dr. Tenopolsky is a professor in the Department of Pediatrics and Division Head of Neuromuscular and Neurometabolic Disorders at McMaster's University. He also holds an endowed professorship in neuromuscular disorders and neurometabolic disorders at McMaster's Children's Hospital. His main areas of research include diagnosis and treatment of neurometabolic disorders. He also works on exercise therapy and diagnostic tools for neuromuscular disorders, exercise and human aging, as well as translational research for aging, mitochondrial, and neurometabolic disorders. He is recognized as an international leader in researching neuromuscular and neurometabolic disorders. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the virtual mic to Dr. Tenopolsky.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Today, I'm very briefly going to talk about exercise and aging. I just came back from a 20K ski up here in beautiful Collingwood, so I practice what I preach. Next slide, please. Great. So as was mentioned, I have an interest in neurometabolic disorders, and the main thing that we study are mitochondrial disorders. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of our cell, and it's very important in the normal physiologic adaptation to things like muscle hypertrophy even, especially in older adults. Not only does the muscle get bigger, we also get more mitochondria when we do weight training. In addition, in both young and older individuals, when they do exercise training, we get what's called mitochondrial biogenesis, which just means that our mitochondria get more connected, they get larger, and more efficient at delivering energy. So we've spent decades studying how nutrition, drugs, and exercise can promote either bigger, stronger muscles and or more fit muscles with more mitochondria. And we've been applying that to a variety of different conditions that result in muscle atrophy, which is the shrinking of muscle, and mitochondrial dysfunction. Today, we're going to focus mostly on aging. And the reason we've been interested in aging is really it depicts two of these issues. As you probably are aware, when you see very old individuals, they have atrophic or thin muscles. But if you do a muscle biopsy and you take a look inside, you can see that the mitochondria are dysfunctional. And this goes across a variety of disorders, from obesity, diabetes, even immobilization. So if you put your leg in a cast for 2 weeks, we found that you lose 20% of your mitochondrial capacity. So a lot of the disorders that you see listed here on the left are features of things that many of us will experience, not just those with genetic disorders. And we're trying to find ways to use exercise and nutrition to move people back towards the norm to improve their function. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess I can control them. So what are the mechanisms by which muscles age, and what happens as we age? So there's something called sarcopenia, which really refers to paucity of flesh. And what this really is operationally defined as a loss of muscle size, which is atrophy, and weakness that's more than 2 standard deviations below age normals. And why this is important is that if your muscles are skinny and weak, it leads to functional impairment, difficulty getting up and downstairs, out of a chair, etc. It's estimated that 25% of 90-year-olds have at least 3 known diseases, which can further impact this. It's known that sarcopenia alone, because of falls and fractures and other things, it costs about $40 billion a year in the United States in 2019. And given, as you can see from the graphs here on the right, that there's an increasing proportion of our population that's over the age of 65, and that's just going to continue. And you can see projected out here till 2025, these costs are going to increase. Sarcopenia, which limits your function, affects at least 10% of those over age 70 and 30% of those over age 80. So in order to develop countermeasures for aging and sarcopenia, we have to know what are the fundamental mechanisms which cause this. We know that there's a loss of our nerves called denervation. The alpha motor neurons, which tell our muscles what to do from our spinal cord, they slowly deteriorate. We lose about 30% of our nerves from age 30 to age 70. Telomeres, which are these little caps on the end of our chromosomes, shorten, and that can slow down the ability of the cell to replicate. We lose, unfortunately, my arrow slipped a bit there. We have a decrease in what's called protein synthesis and an increase in degradation. There's damage to DNA. And importantly, also, there's this process called dysregulated nutrient sensing or anabolic resistance. Normally, especially after we exercise, if we eat protein, we stimulate our protein synthetic pathways, but older adults don't do that with the same robustness. We also know that stem cells become either lower in number or they just don't activate properly. And some of this can be due to a process called oxidative stress, which some of you might be familiar with. So you've probably heard of free radicals and antioxidants. The antioxidants that we have in our body and that we eat can try to mitigate this. There's also impairment in the cells talking to each other through processes called exosomes, chronic inflammation, and there's actually a whole area of aging called inflammaging. And then, as I pointed out, mitochondrial dysfunction, I think, is really at the core of many of these processes. So if we look at mitochondria, not only if they are not working properly, do we get a decrease in energy production, but other processes that are important for health are affected. So the thing called apoptosis, which is a form of cell death, gets activated. The telomeres become shorter. The inflammatory pathways are activated. Oxidative stress goes up. And it leads to something called cell senescence, where the cells just become essentially like a zombie and they just don't function properly. So what can we do about all of this? And why I was asked to talk on this talk today is that it's all not doom and gloom. There are things that we can do to improve our function. So one of them is exercise. So many studies, and I just have one here on running because I'm a runner, to show how important this is to human health. So this was a study from Northern California where they looked at 539 runners and compared them to 423 controls. Everyone, when they started the study, was at least age 50, and then at 21 years, they looked to see what was the incidence of cancer and death. What they found was 15% of the runners died during that 21-year follow-up, but 34% of the sedentary people died. And this and many other studies, if you put them together, on average, people who regularly exercise get about a 4-year lifespan extension and a healthier last 4 years of life. So there's actually lower cancer risk. This was a huge study looking at over 1 million people, and they found that almost every cancer incidence is lower in those who habitually exercise. The only exceptions are prostate, for reasons we don't understand, and melanoma, probably because people who exercise are outside more and you have more sun exposure. But it's only a small increase for melanoma in spite of the massive increase in sun exposure. So make sure to wear your sunscreen. So we've done some studies where we looked at the benefits of long-term exercise. So this is what we call a master's athlete. So these are people that have been active most of their life. And what we did is we measured their VO2 max. And as you might expect, athletes have a higher VO2 max, which is reflective of your physical fitness and your mitochondria. So in young people, you can see the big increase. Over time, it does decline, and so we can't totally reverse aging, but you can see that the older adults in black here, the active individuals or master's athletes, were still at or slightly above sedentary 20-year-olds. So and a person over 65 is healthier from a mitochondrial perspective if they're active regularly than a sedentary youngster. So we did a number of other interesting samplings. What we did is we looked at skin in particular and a whole bunch of other things, but I'm going to focus on skin. And what we found is that skin health was quite a bit better in the older adults who regularly exercised. And what we found also is when we looked at over an entire lifespan, those who were active had improvements in skin health. So you're probably familiar with what's called the dermis, which is where the collagen is, and you've heard of people getting collagen injections. So what we did is we also took our older adults, this is Lauren McNeil, one of my students, and we studied 32 men and women who were over 65, and we did a skin biopsy before and after 3 months of endurance training. And what we found was an improvement in the dermis that responded to exercise that brought them back almost to that of a young individual. So it's never too late to start. And interestingly, what this shows is that exercise releases factors which influence our whole body. So it's not just our muscles and heart, but many tissues get better with exercise. So I'll just finally finish with weight training. We've been talking about endurance, but interestingly, with weight training in young people, everyone knows that increases muscle size and strength. But traditionally, people haven't thought of it as stimulating our mitochondria. So we did a study in 70-year-old men and women We trained them for 6 months, twice per week, doing standard weight training, starting off fairly light and then going right up to what a younger person would do, 75% of their maximum. And we did muscle biopsies before and after. And what we found in these individuals was an improvement in their strength and also an improvement in mitochondria. But the other thing that we did in this study is that we also saw whether supplements further enhance this. So we used a supplement called creatine and another thing called conjugated linoleic acid to try and enhance muscle growth and also to reduce body fat. And what we found is during that study, those who trained when they were taking creatine and CLA had more muscle mass gain and more fat mass gain, but also improved mitochondria. So this is the final 2 slides. What we did is that we wanted to see at the whole gene level what was changing. So we did these things called gene arrays, and we looked at the young and old people and the old people before and after exercise. And what we found is that there was a big difference between young and old. In the older individuals, there was a big suppression of mitochondria. But after the training period, which I just described, with weight training, what we found is that the increase in inflammation and the decrease in mitochondrial function that was seen with aging completely reversed and pretty much went back to that of a young person. So with that, a very brief overview of just a tiny bit of what we've done. These are some of the partners and folks, grad students and collaborators who've contributed to the work. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that really interesting talk, Dr. Terepolsky. It's really good for me, and I'm sure the audience as well, to learn about the research that's going on about understanding how exercise is going to impact our health overall, and what are some of the key components within our bodies that are facilitating that improvement, like you've shown us with the mitochondrial integrity of the participants that you measured in your research. So thank you for that very interesting talk. So next up, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Catherine Sabiston. She is a professor at the University of Toronto and holds a Canadian Research Chair in Physical Activity and Mental Health. Her work is recognized for improving sport and exercise psychology theory, research, and practice, with a particular focus on body image and mental health more broadly. Dr. Sabiston has secured over $24 million in funding support for her research. She has published nearly 300 journal articles, co-authored 2 textbooks, and presented extensively to the academic and public audiences, and has developed important industry and community partnerships to enhance sports and exercise experiences. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand over the stage to Dr. Sabiston.
Thank you, Priya, for that introduction, and hello, everyone. So my role today is to talk to you about mental health and the role that physical activity and exercise can play in terms of your mental well-being and mental health more generally. What I want to do is I have a few takeaways for you to take today. The first one is for me to tell you that there is uncontested evidence that exercise and physical activity more broadly is beneficial for mental health. And I don't have, slides showing you the graphs or the evidence today, but you can take it from me that there is, a large and continuously growing body of evidence to suggest that there are a number of ways in which physical activity improves your mental health. We also know that physical activity, it prevents some mental illnesses, such as depression and anxiety. We know that for individuals who are diagnosed with a mental illness, we know that physical activity can help improve their quality of life. And we also know that physical activity can be used in general as a treatment plan for a number of mental illnesses. And so, again, across the spectrum of, sort of prevention of mental health, mental illness, through to treatment, there is a strong body of evidence to suggest that physical activity is beneficial. When I talk about mental health and mental illness, most of the evidence that we know focuses on anxiety, depression, both from a clinical capacity as well as symptoms. We also know that there's some evidence around bipolar, and we know that quite a bit of evidence around physical activity improving things like self-esteem. And as you heard in the introduction, our work oftentimes also focuses on body image. There's a strong connection there as well. So that was my first point is, really there's uncontested evidence to suggest that physical activity improves and helps with mental health. The second is that we know that physical activity works better than nothing at all for your mental health. Not doing anything is not as good as doing something. We also know that physical activity has benefits that are at least on par, if not better, than many of the treatments and therapies that exist for people with mental illness. So if we compare some of the treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapies or mindfulness training and meditation, we know that exercise is comparable and or potentially better for mental health. We also know that when we compare exercise to traditional pharmacotherapies or drugs for mental illness, we know that exercise is not any worse than individuals who are just taking medication. So there's a strength to that relationship, which is critical when we're talking about mental health. So you might be asking now, why? Why does exercise work for mental health? And there's a few different theories that we continuously test in terms of understanding the mechanism or the link between physical activity and mental health. So the first one, which is sort of a historical theory, suggests that as humans, we've become way more sedentary than we ever were meant to be. And so because our baseline is now more sedentary, we tend to have more mental health concerns than our predecessors from years, decades, centuries before us. And so there's this theory that suggests that if we exercise, we're moving our body towards where humans should be in terms of movement, and that benefits our mental health. So that theory or that hypothesis is called the anthropomorphic hypothesis around the link between physical activity and mental health. We also know that exercise increases your body temperature, and increasing in body temperature gives you this sense of warmth, this sense of comfort, and all of those conditions are considered to be part of your mental health. So by exercising, we increase our body's temperature, we feel better, we feel warmer, we feel more comforted, and in that sense of your body being warmer, we know that improves your mental health. So the thermogenic sort of hypothesis suggests that increasing your body's temperature is good for your mental health. We also know that by exercising, for some people, it's a distraction. It's a complete avoidance of part of one's day, or getting out and not thinking about the things that are concerns in your life. And this can, just by the distraction alone, can help with your mental health. It's a coping mechanism. It gets you out. Oftentimes, as you heard in Mark's presentation too, the being outdoors, he used research on outdoor running, and just being in the outdoors is really helpful for your mental health as well. We also know that physical activity, when we do exercise or physical activities, what we see is that our confidence is increased, and we feel better. We build a mastery, or we build confidence in what we do. And by building that confidence or mastery, it improves our mental health, because we like to succeed as humans. And so that success and that feedback that we get from seeing that success and feelings of confidence really improves our mental health as well. And then there's also some suggestion that physical activity improves our mental health because of the social connotations around physical activity. So you don't necessarily have to be exercising with someone else. Of course, the pandemic has made a lot of restrictions around the social environment for physical activity. But what we do know is, just considering that you're part of a movement, you're part of a group of people who are exercising, if you are engaging in exercise with others in group-based or online in virtual classes, there's this added benefit to your mental health by being active with others. So the social hypothesis that physical activity helps with our mental health is that added benefit being around others or feeling like others are there to support you in your work that you're doing by being physically active. Of course, I think the last hypothesis that links the two, physical activity and mental health, is sort of your brain chemistry. So by being active, we have a number of different brain chemistry reactions that happen. Our neurotransmitters, our endorphins, all are enacted when we exercise, and this in turn leads to better mental health. So really, there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can say physical activity leads to mental health. It's really important these days, especially the new year, especially continuing pandemic, to consider the possible ways in which you might be active throughout your day. And we're going to hear more about this as well. What I want to highlight is for mental health, there are no guidelines for physical activity type, frequency, bouts, intensities for mental health. What we know is that, as I mentioned very early on, any level of movement is good for your mental health. We know that light intensity exercise, which tends to be forgotten in a lot of the public health discourse and guidelines, is actually really good for mental health. Even just small bouts of movement throughout your day is critical. And so what I want to leave you with is just this idea that when you're engaging in any kind of exercise or movement, especially for mental health, make sure that you're intentional with your exercise or your movements. Make sure that you try to plan and pay attention to how you feel after you've engaged in a bout of exercise for your mental health. And try to avoid being self-critical, especially these days. We see that self-criticisms come from not only us feeling like we can't fit physical activity into our days, or the pandemic has influenced the different guidelines around us, but what we also know is that a lot of social comparisons online, when you're searching social media, can be really detrimental to mental health. And so try to focus on yourself, your own goals, your own focus for your mental health, and just be kind to yourself. Use physical activity as a form of self-care, and that's the best thing that you can do for mental health.
Thank you for that, Dr. Savison. That was a great talk. I really gravitated towards your comment about not being critical when you're embarking on any of these exercise regimes that you might have, whether it's high intensity or low intensity. Like you said, comparison really can be the killer of joy. And in this day and age of, the internet and information being out there, whether it is real or fake, it's so easy for us to look at a picture and compare ourselves to whoever we're seeing and what workouts that they're doing and the results that they might be having, say within the first week, if we've been doing that and haven't had our results just yet. So being mindful about, what our journey is while we're embarking on our exercising or just staying active is really going to help us be purposeful. And again, your comment about having this as an act of self-care is really important as well. When we frame our exercising as something that is going to be beneficial for our mental health as well as our physical health, that could actually help us be more consistent with our activities. So thank you for that. So next up, it is my pleasure to move on to Dr. Mary Young. Dr. Young is an associate professor in the School of Health and Exercise Sciences at the University of British Columbia. Shout out to UBC. Dr. Young is the head of Diabetes Prevention Research Group, the founder of the Diabetes Prevention Group called Small Steps for Big Changes, as well as the director of the Center for Health Behavior Change. Her overarching research interests lie in the area of self-regulation of health behaviors, with particular focus on dietary and exercise adherence for the prevention of type 2 diabetes. Dr. Young's current funding studies include effectiveness of health technologies, exercise counseling for individuals with prediabetes, and exercise adherence. working with the community and formulating what the next research endeavors are that are going to be pivotal for her programs to ensure that the research is meaningful and useful to those who will use this knowledge. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over the mic to Dr.
Great. Thanks so much, and thanks to Dr. Tarnopolsky and Savistund for setting me up so well. If I wasn't already convinced, I'm convinced now for the importance of regular physical activity and movement for promoting your physical and mental health. And so I think what I've been asked to talk about today is really how can we set up this ourselves up for success so that we're adhering to our exercise regimes. And so I do get asked this a lot because I tell people I love to study adherence to health behaviors. And I often get asked at this time, how can I stick to my New Year's resolutions, or why haven't I succeeded so far? And so you probably have heard about some acronyms to set specific goals and put a time stamp on them, make them time oriented. And I absolutely agree with all of those tips. What I'd like to share with you today are some additional tips that maybe you haven't heard about before, maybe just reframing the way you think about New Year's resolutions. Because we know that up to 80, it's usually around 70 to 85% people who are taking these surveys tell us that they failed their New Year's resolutions well before today. So January 23rd, is it today? Usually the January 15th, the vast majority of people have already failed and stopped attempting to reach them. So I think there are, in addition to some of the other problems that we know about and those related to the pandemic, there's three other pieces that I think are pretty key in why people aren't achieving those New Year's resolutions. The first one I'd say is they're not setting the right goals. The second one is that the motive for the goals they set is not self-serving. And the third one is that we often don't set ourselves up for success. And so when I go through these, three reasons, I'm going to introduce first the foundation of those three pieces by something that Dr. Savistund was already alluding to, and that is self-compassion. So self-compassion is comprised of three principles, and I'll just quickly talk about those and then discuss how they relate to the three problems of our New Year's resolutions. So one of the principles is self-kindness, and that's helpful to think about self-kindness as the opposite of self-judgment. So whenever we have an inside thought or this ongoing consideration in your head of you're not good enough, or your shame or disgust or disappointment with oneself, that's the self-judgment talk, that critical conversation that you would never outwardly state, very likely ever state and voice to anybody else, or even let anyone else know that that's what you're saying to yourself. That's how hurtful those comments are. And so when we're setting our goals and aligning ourselves up for success, we really want to be on the self-kindness side of things versus the self-judgment kinds of things. So shame statements, not the way to go. The second principle in self-compassion is about common humanity. And that really is just telling us that, reminding us that out of all the billions of people in this world, there are several million at least who are thinking the same thing as you, who are having the same struggles, who set an exercise New Year's resolution and have failed. It's reminding us that we alone are not the only one that is struggling, that is experiencing the pandemic, for example. And sometimes in our own heads, when we're locked up and disconnected, we can forget that. And the other principle around self-compassion is this idea around being mindful. And mindfulness may seem a little bit esoteric to New Year's resolutions, but I'm here to suggest some practical tips on how we can bring that into our New Year's resolutions, into our exercise rituals, and how that will help us adhere to them. So when I think about mindfulness, I'm thinking about really being present and acknowledging the reality of this current state. So when we are in our own heads, which we tend to get into a lot, we can retell the same story to ourselves over and over and over again. And it might be, failed again. Yep, there you go again. It's January 15th and you're off of exercise. Oh, there you go. You paid for this app, or you signed up for these classes and you didn't go. See, I knew you wouldn't do it. It's this constant reminder to ourselves of failure, rather than reframing the situation, being really mindful and thinking about, wow, I attempted again. I signed up for this app. Hey, I went 3 times over the last 10 days, or over the last 20 days, whatever it is. There's key successes in there. And checking the facts, the statements like, I'll never do it. See, I can't do it. I've tried it, but I failed again. I'll never be able to. Of course, we know never to say never. So being really critical to ourselves about fact checking. So those are those 3 principles of self-compassion, and here's how we can apply them when we're talking about setting up exercise regimes that stick. First, we need to set the right goals. So even if you've already set New Year's resolutions, amazing, good for you. I would honestly say pat on the back. That's your first step. And we know those great inventors, and we know anyone who's ever struggled but achieved something has fallen down more than, not more than they've gotten up, but they've definitely fallen down numerous times. So we need to set new goals. We need to try and fail, just like we tell our children. And then we revise our goals. Then we revise our plan. And that's, I think, where many people falter, is that the goals that they set themselves are incredibly unrealistic. So when I work with people in the community, they often set goals such as exercising twice a day, or aiming to hit 60 minutes every single day without ever consideration for a break. They often set goals about the outcome rather than the behavior that they need to achieve that outcome. So it'll be lose 20 pounds, or it will be become fit. And what we do in my lab is try and teach people that the real success is when you enact in the behavior that you know will lead to the desired outcome, and you focus on tracking that behavior. So if we're going to become fit, then really we want you to set a goal around the behavior, the specific behavior that you will do each day or every 3 days of every week, that will align or reach that outcome, and then track that. With that behavior, then we help them set something that's attainable. So for many people, if you are not engaging in any exercise, starting out with 60 minutes each and every day, or even every other day, or even once a week, is, I would argue, not where the start point should be. The start point should be beginning exercise by enjoying nature, as Dr. Sarnopolsky and Sabiston suggested, 5 minutes, one walk around the block to get out and enjoy the sunshine. Will it make you fit? Sure, it will, but it'll also do a lot of other things. Which brings me to the second point about the New Year's resolution failures, is that the motive is often derailing. And so by that, I mean, the motives are so unmotivating that it's no wonder. I'm actually amazed oftentimes when people tell me what their motive is, that they even tried it all. So if it is because, I look horrible, I'm not going to fit in my wedding dress, I have this reunion, or I have, this competitor, this self-comparison Dr. Sabiston already spoke of, I want to be better than ex-wife, or whatever it is. How incredibly demoralizing right from the get-go, instead of focusing on the motive that brings you joy and will actually be motivating to engage in the behaviors that you need to achieve the outcome that you're searching for. And so this is where the idea of self-kindness comes in. So rather than focusing on a motive that is harsh and shameful, I need to do X because I look horrible, because I am ashamed, or because I'm disgusted with X part of me. That's not a motivating reason. If you were going to put a sticky note and put that out to the world and share that, people would probably come and tell you how hurtful that is, how like, oh my goodness, you know, you don't look that way, or you aren't that way. So rather than focusing on shame-based statements, I think it's important to find the motive that is inspiring you. So I want to be fit. Really critically digest that. What is fit and why do you want to be there? If it's if it's entirely out of shame, find new reasons. Be fit because you want to teach your grandkids how to cross country ski, or because you want to be able to be fit enough to dance your niece's wedding on the dance floor, or because you know the pain in your knee is hurting and it reduces your overall quality of life, because you want to be with your dog and walk that dog. Whatever it is, find other reasons other than ones that put you in a sense of shame. The other piece about goals, the final piece, is about not setting ourselves up for failure. And this is where I think common humanity comes in. So as Dr. Savison was alluding to, there's so many great benefits of engaging in physical activity with others, even if that's virtual or even if that's just, you know, a work competition. But what often happens is we set ourselves up for failure by setting unrealistic ones, but also by not acknowledging the how other people got there. So if it is, you know, I want to walk for 100 days in a row, or I want to, let's say you set some really specific positive goals, such as I want to go outside and go for a walk for at least 5 minutes every single day for the next 100 days, or I want to be able to track my exercise on an exercise app, even on the days that I don't exercise. We want to seek out other humans who are currently engaging in the same goals, and honest and good, honest, open, transparent humans. The ones that say, "Hey, I didn't meet my goal today. I fell into this trap," or "The weather outside was brutal. I didn't go out today." And you want to do that because it's a great reminder that you're not alone in this world. And of course, we can learn from other people's failures, just like we learn from ourselves, which, by the way, is a really good thing to do. Share your failures with others as well. We can learn faster if we be honest and open, and also learn from others' mistakes just as much as our own. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears to what we can do to make these lasting rituals. So in addition to, you know, setting goals that are focused on the behavior and that are realistic and that are kind to ourselves, in addition to finding motives that are actually motivating for you, and to setting yourself up for success by not necessarily exercising always with others if that's not your jam, but exercising and learning from others' mistakes. Some other pieces that I think would may be helpful for you if I have time, and I'm happy to speed up here if I've lost track of time, is this idea of radical self-compassion. And this is something where Tara Brach's work, if you're interested, she has some great literature and resources, is this idea that if we radically be self-compassionate, we'll get to our goals faster. And I'm going to summarize all her great work. she's the expert, but essentially akin to parenting. So this idea of parenting yourself, I think, will lead to greater attainment of goals and a greater ritual, a habitual routine of exercise that you can stick to. And by parenting, I mean, put in mind your pet or your child or your grandkid or your niece or nephew or just a child on the street that you care about. If you wouldn't talk to them the way you're talking to yourself, probably not a good way to talk to yourself. How you speak to that individual, that young kid or your pet is going to be indicative of how much they want to come back and listen to you. So if there is harshness, if there's a lack of self-kindness, if there's judgment, kid's going to walk away. So don't walk away from yourself, because then why bother exercising? Why going out there in the first place? The other tip I would say is gratitude. So when we are out to engage in exercise, first few minutes can feel yucky. Absolutely, you're not alone in that. So find the gratitude moment in it. Is it the sun shining down as soon as you step out the door? Is it the fresh air? Is it the fact that you can exercise in a fitness facility today where you couldn't last year? Is it because you found a new yoga app that was free, bonus, online, and you never would have found that if you hadn't been, if your yoga studios had been closed down for the last 12 months? So finding those moments of gratitude can also set us up for success, because gratitude makes us feel good. And then tomorrow, you're going to want that sunshine or moment of, this feels good. And then the final piece I will say is get your facts checked. And this comes back to that idea of mindfulness and self-compassion. When we say statements to ourselves, like, I'll never do this, or I am a failure, ask a friend, ask that child on your street if they think that's correct, if they actually believe it. And chances are what we're telling ourselves in our head is not correct. I'm going to end off there, and I'm keen to answer any questions or have a good conversation. But thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that really great talk. I got so much little nuggets of information. And one of the things that you touched upon that is really sometimes underappreciated is gratitude. And really gratitude about the little things, not the big things. It's so easy for us to go, okay, yes, I won this car, I got a raise, and we forget the simple things like I slept in a bed and it was warm. Right. So really those like simple moments of gratitude can really change the perspective of all of the things that we're doing in life, and especially things that we find challenging, like making these New Year's resolutions. A lot of the time and it revolves around exercising. And like you said, by this time, pretty much we've forgotten what we did. We think we can't do it anymore. And we just are down on ourselves because we set these goals that really we weren't thinking about the journey or the behavior, like you said, that would actually facilitate that goal. And it really reminded me of something my coach would always tell us every time we had a goal, and everyone's goal is to have a personal best in whatever their event was. He said, forget about your goal and think about the journey to the goal, because that's where you're going to make that sort of improvement if you're going to do it. You figure out what you need to do, how you're going to do it, and then you start to execute. And then the goals will fall into place eventually. So thank you so much for that. So again, to the audience, please remember, if you have any questions or you have any comments, feel free to post them in our comments section. You can also use our different social media handles. You can post them as Twitter as well as Insta if you would like. So at this time, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for really such a great and informative talk on the different aspects of exercise that they are studying, and for giving us a little bit more on that to take with our New Year's goals and resolutions as we plan ahead. So next up, we are going to play a quick round of a very fun game that is called Some Questionable News. And so a brief overview of this is it's a game to promote media literacy. We are going to present you with some headlines on the screen. You can already see that we're setting up. And we want you to guess if these headlines are actually real headlines or something that we have made up to be catchy for you. And so just note, we're not asking you about the science of it. We just want you to tell us if you think the headline itself is real or fake. So you can play along by putting in your answer in the comment section, the chat box. You can also use our new function through our poll on the YouTube, so you can play along there as well. And our experts are also going to be playing along with us. So we will start off with the first headline. So breaking news, studies suggest that you could get the benefits of exercise without actually having to exercise. So in the comments, please let us know if you think this is real news headline or it is a fake one that we have made up. I know a lot of us would like that. Just sit at home and think about it. So I will give us about 15 seconds, and then we will also discuss what our panelists think, if it is real or fake. I'll put my thoughts in there. So. All right, so let us start off first with our panelists' thoughts. Dr. Savison, do you think this is a real or fake headline?
I think it's fake. Do you want to know why?
Yes,
or no?
Please.
Okay. I just think it's fake because there's always, we always tend to lean on the idea that if you could bottle up all the benefits of exercise into a pill, then, you know, everybody would be great, because we know there's so many benefits to exercise. So I don't know. I don't think we can see that.
Awesome. All right. So 54% of our audience says that it is real. Dr. Jung, you actually told us you think it's fake. Can you elaborate on why you think it is a fake headline?
Yeah, because there's so many benefits that I just don't think we even know all of them yet. So how can we even, if it was a pill or a drink or whatever it is, how could we get it? How could we sneak all those in there when we don't even know all the benefits? And the other piece of me thinks there's always side effects. With exercise, the side effects are positive. With other pieces, the side effects more likely to be negative.
Yeah, thank you for that. And turn it over to Dr. Tenopolsky to share his thoughts.
Yeah, sadly, the headline is actually true. And for some of you who remember about 15 years ago, some basic scientists who don't actually see patients or translate their research, they will mutate a gene and then say, oh, look, I can get the same benefits of exercise and I can run just as far. So these type of statements come out frequently, even by, very reputable news agencies. But as my esteemed colleagues have pointed out, it's fake in reality. I personally, and we've been trying to, show some of these benefits with various nutritional supplements and other things for our patients, but nothing will mimic the multisystemic benefits of exercise. So yes, you can go in a sauna, increase heat shock proteins, and get a little bit of mitochondrial adaptation. But there's so many other benefits. We have changes that go on in the brain, which lower the risk of depression and anxiety, as was pointed out. And that too can be linked to mitochondrial changes in AMP kinase, et cetera, et cetera. But to get all of the myriad of benefits that we know, from lower risk of cataracts, improved hearing, skin, cardiovascular benefits, but more importantly, I think what others have highlighted on today, which I feel every day when I exercise, is just the incredible enjoyment that you have when you find what you enjoy. And as we say to kids, go out and do a smorgasbord of activity, because everyone's an athlete. You just got to find what you enjoy doing, and once you've done that, exercise becomes much easier, and you get so many other benefits.
Awesome. Thank you. That was very insightful. And yes, like you have said, this is actually a real headline. So maybe I could throw out a question to the panel. for the community that actually reads this, we are, inundated with all of these sorts of headlines. How do we navigate what is actually real? Not just the headlines, but the actual science that was done to generate this headline if we don't really know about the science, but we want the benefits of the results? How do we just as a community navigate these sorts of headlines and make our own informed decisions about what we think? I'll start off with Dr. Jung.
Yeah, thanks. I love that question. I would say look at two spots: who the study was done on, and ask yourself, are they similar to me? If it was only people identifying as men, and you are not identifying as a man, not probably going to be all that relatable. The second thing is the intervention. So what did they do to be able to say this piece affects that outcome? So if the exercise in this example was, let's say, rats being weighted down, and that was to mimic swimming, and that type of that is the form of exercise, totally could be valid to work with humans. But is the claim, is the headline or statement justified, or is it being overstated based on what the actual intervention was?
Awesome, thank you for that. Dr. Savison, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say that, all of these articles do highlight at least a little bit of who did the study or a link to the original study. And so, you don't need a lot of scientific literacy to look at, like Mary's suggesting, the who and the final outcomes of the study. And really a good practice is to question everything. You don't you can't take things at face value. And so the more that we critique and the more that we question the types of titles and headlines that we see, the more likely we are to be our own advocates. And that's, the most important piece of again, like a self-care strategy, is to be our own advocates and to understand ourselves. And so you need to see yourself in the headlines, but also highlight and find the actual core of the study that was done. And these types of headlines should not be done because of one study. So that's the other part of it, that one study should not be generating this type of, very big, lofty goal, so that's another piece.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Tanopolsky.
Sure. I think the first thing is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is probably fake. Number two, I would say, generally, when you look at the reputable news sources, that's where you're going to have them carefully screened. I'm always amazed when I talk to CBC or ABC or any of the BBC, for example, the level to which they go through and they actually interrogate and really try to find out the truth. If you're getting something as a tweeted tweet from another tweet, you've got to really question those sort of things. The other issue I would say, which was alluded to earlier, is studies done on cells, or what we call preclinical models, which is mice and rats generally, are rarely translatable to humans. And yet most of these are based, most of these sensationalist comments are based on a petri dish, or you knock out a gene in a mouse and then they make these wild extrapolations. And even with drugs in humans, often we go all the way through to the very final study, where it's called a double-blind study, before we finally can tell if something really is going to work. So if it isn't in humans and it's not been very well researched and usually replicated, as was pointed out by Catherine, I wouldn't put too much credence into what they're saying.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you to all the panelists. We will move on to the second headline. All right. We'll just get that bad boy on the screen. So, breaking news: exercise mistakes that can shorten your lifespan, science says. Do you think this is a real headline or a fake one? Give about 15 seconds to everyone in the audience to make their decisions. Awesome. Give 5 more seconds to get the audience feedback. Awesome. So first, let's turn it over to our esteemed panelist, Dr. Tenopolsky, sorry. Do you think this is real or fake? And you've told us in the comment section that you think it is false. Could you maybe elaborate on why you think this is false?
Yeah, I mean, anything goes when it comes to crazy headlines, but this is almost certainly a false statement, but somebody might have mentioned it. So, I mean, other than dropping a weight on your head and killing yourself, or not learning how to swim and jumping into a lake, there's very few things that you can do, I think, to hurt yourself, other than poor technique and getting a sports injury. But that's not going to shorten your lifespan. And I really think that any movement is good movement for humans. Throughout evolution, we moved, and it's only recently that we have slowed down, and that's not our biologic default. So keep moving and ignore these crazy statements.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So our audience, 67% of them think that this is a fake headline as well. We've got a split between our other panelists. Dr. Savastin thinks it is a true headline, and Dr. Mary Young thinks it's a fake one. The results are it is actually a real headline story. So this was actually done as a study for 700 professional male artists, and it suggested that daily extraneous exercises as an occupation corresponded to shorter lifespan, and there were other things as well associated in this study. So we're going to move through the last two headlines fairly quickly. If we can put up the next one, which says, exercise doesn't burn that many calories. Here's the health benefits it does provide. So let's take about 15 seconds and say if we think it is a real or a fake headline. Awesome. I will open up the floor to Dr. Savastin to tell me if she thinks it is real or fake.
I think it is fake. I'm on the fence on this one. I was more sure on the other one. but I think, it's, there's a lot of health benefits to exercise. And in context, when you see the term exercise without what exercise, this is way too misleading to even have a clear thought in my head on whether it's true or fake, because different exercises have different levels of calories that they burn, but also serve very different purposes, as we've all talked about today. So that's where I'm standing right now, on the fence.
So I like that. That's a nice diplomatic answer. So this headline turns out to also be real. And 70% of our audience thought that it was real as well. So in this article, they talked about burning calories doesn't necessarily equate to good health, and extra exercise may not burn as many calories as we think. And the last headline that we have for our game today is weight loss. Is it bad to work out every day? Do we think this is real or fake? Take about 15 seconds. All right, I will open the floor over to Dr. Young to share her thoughts on if she thinks it's real or fake and why.
Well, I think I'm getting the game now, and I'm sure any statement that can be sensationalized is going to be in the media. Suggesting that working out every day might be bad for you is something that the media might want to say to pick up a reader or two. In terms of the reality of the statement, it's so broad. How could we possibly is getting out and walking around the block every day bad? I doubt it, right? Is doing strenuous exercise for hours on end every single day bad for you? It might be for certain people. So yeah, it's kind of a grandiose statement. So
Agreed. Thank you. And even our audience is having a 50-50 split that think that this is real versus fake. But like you said, it is a real headline as well. So thank you, everyone, for playing the game. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you to our panelists for participating. Next up, we're going to move into the question and answer segment of this event. So again, please remember, if you've got any questions, to post them in the chat box or in our social media handles as well. So I will kick off the questions right away. So one question we have is, what are some strategies people can use to do physical activities, even when experiencing some symptoms like low energy or a lack of interest or a negative emotion? And I would like to start with Dr. Young for her thoughts on this.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's where so many people are at right now. The pandemic continuing has really taken a toll, of course. I'm sure Catherine can tell us more specifically, but on our mental health and on feelings of just lethargy. And so I would suggest practical strategies would be starting small and setting something specific with others. So that might be, I am going to take 10 deep breaths and stand up out of my work chair for 1 minute before every meeting, or one time at lunchtime, or at the beginning of each day. I'm going to do a sun salutation if I practice yoga, or I'm going to bend my knees and do 10 squats, whatever it is, something that is manageable for your current situation. And so if you're working from home, those are all the things I just thought of, because lots of people are working from home right now. But it could be, of course, different on your circumstances. Knowing that you can do, like, if you have complete control of what the behavior you just suggested, or if you set a behavior that you have complete control over, then ticking a little check mark off every day reminds yourself that, oh yeah, I can do it, I did do it. And that idea of self-confidence or self-efficacy, like Catherine alluded to, that builds, right? So 10 deep breaths might not feel like enough right now, but after a week or two of doing that, maybe it's like, okay, well, that does feel good. I actually feel like I'm in charge and I'm moving my body. I do want to take it up. I want to do 20, or I want to do whatever it is. And that's honestly how we achieve great things. We take small steps.
Thank you for that. Yes, definitely taking those little steps that would get us to the greater goal is a great place to start. And you've talked about so much, the self-compassion, the awareness, and the accountability. The honest accountability is really going to be helpful as well. Thank you for that. The next question we have is for Dr. Tanopolsky. And could you talk a little bit more about your work with exercise therapy for your patients with severe genetic diseases, and maybe some of the myths around exercise that exist for that group?
Sure, that's an excellent question. So muscular dystrophy in particular is a disorder that 26 years ago, when I started my practice, our patients were encouraged not to exercise, and they thought that they'd be tearing their muscle and causing more damage. The downside, of course, is that for so many folks who are weak to begin with, you're not moving very much, so you're not burning calories. And so what would happen is they would gain an inordinate amount of weight. And, if you put a 50-pound backpack on anyone and try and get out of a chair, it's a challenge. So a lot of folks were ending up in a wheelchair, or just having more and more impairments in their daily activities just from the sheer weight gain, because they weren't doing anything. And then you throw that on top of the fact that we now know that with properly executed exercise, we actually can improve and maintain strength. It's very well documented, and a good friend and colleague, John Vissing in Copenhagen, has done lots of research in this area to show the benefits. Just as a little example, we have a paper that will be coming out in 2 months where we had patients with myotonic muscular dystrophy. And one lady was so weak, she lasted 34 seconds on a bike with zero resistance when we started. At the end of 4 months, of careful and gradually increasing intensity and duration, she could go 3 times a week for half an hour. She lost 3.5 kilos of body fat. Her fitness went up 31%, and she was able to climb stairs better, walk, etc. And that's just one of many examples. Even for boys with the severe Duchenne dystrophy, the only boy I've seen who is still walking at over 20 years of age, didn't take any steroids or any other drug, but from the time he was 4, his grandfather, who was a yoga master, took him under his wing and would spend 2 hours a day with him stretching, doing yoga, and then doing some cycling. And he's in university now in 2nd year. Keep in mind with that disease, most people on average are in a wheelchair at age 11. So they're just, you've got to be sensitive to, again, what are their strengths. You've got to give them, as we do with all children, and I think also for adults, to show people a smorgasbord of activities so that you can find what works best for you. Because if someone told me to swim every day, I'd give up on exercise. But if you get me out running or cross-country skiing 7 days a week is not enough for me. And I think the same is true of older adults, the same is true of young children, and for those with various neurolocomotor disabilities, not just genetic muscle disease, but arthritis. We know severe osteoarthritis folks benefit from it. So I can't think of a disorder where people won't benefit from appropriately prescribed exercise. It's got to be fun, and it's got to be done on a regular basis, and people will reap the benefits.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, like you said, finding the fun in that physical activity goes a long way. I'm kind of the opposite of you, where if someone told me to run, I would not want to at all. I would rather like go kickboxing or something that seems like high intensity versus just run.
And that's the beauty of exercise. There are thousands of different types of exercise.
Exactly.
And you just got to find what you like.
Exactly. Oh, that's great advice. Awesome. So the next question is towards Dr. Savison, and it is, are there differences between populations when it comes to physical activity's impact on mental health? And when you talk about that, maybe could you touch upon accessibility of these different forms of engaging in physical activities for people that think that, that's the bottleneck for them, is where are they going to do it? How are they going to do it wherever they're located?
Yeah, so what we know is, there's still a lot of research that needs to happen in terms of understanding the nuances around the actual underlying reasons why exercise and physical activity work for mental health across a number of different populations. What we do know is in the studies that include people of different identities in a variety of capacities, different illnesses, we tend to see the benefits of mental health from exercise. So there doesn't seem to be a group that doesn't benefit from exercise. What we do see is the challenges lie in some mental illnesses where the challenge lies in getting started. So, lack of motivation, for example, is a core symptom of depression. And so how do you start to exercise if you're experiencing overwhelming lack of motivation and anhedonia and most things in your day? We just heard fun is the core element of exercise. So if you don't find fun or an interest or enjoyment or motivation, how do you start to engage in exercise? And it's really critical to think about. I think what we've tried to do here today is dispel the myth that exercise or physical activity is just, we've used running as a lot of examples, but it's not just running, biking, swimming, weights. There's thousands of different movement related behaviors that you can engage in regardless of ability, regardless of location, regardless of living condition. And so it's about finding the activity that's accessible to you, to always focus on changing up the environment, change the context, change the type of movement that you're doing, do little bouts. So start really small and build it. Not focusing on big times of day that you have to move, and focus on really small bouts throughout the day instead of one big one. Oftentimes it's hard for people to think, for a certain amount of time, I don't have that in my day. But if you're doing smaller bouts, it's really important. We know that, again, just smaller movements, changing the type, changing the frequency, making it more enjoyable for you. There's so many different elements of exercise. You know, we've talked about frequency, we've talked about type, we've talked about intensity, we've talked about where you engage in exercise. So even just there, you can change a lot about what you're doing in your day to find the things that you enjoy and find the things that you benefit from. So, you know, really there aren't many constraints when you take your own context into heart and focus on just small things that you can do to move, especially for mental health. You know, we do see those benefits. So I think I answered your question, but
yes, you did. Thank you. You definitely answered the question. And even just based on your answer, I keep thinking about like my personal experiences, especially when the pandemic hit, where it was just all uncertainty. It didn't matter what the question was. It was just so much uncertainty. And so I started walking outside for my sanity. I would just go outside, put on a podcast, and just, get lost in the podcast that I was listening to. But, life happens and I broke my leg. So the first thing that happened to me was I can't go walk. I can't do anything. And I felt really down for a little bit. But then it was like, okay, maybe I can just go outside and take 2 steps when I could actually like go on crutches, like just go outside, feel the fresh air, come back, and then try to start increasing what I was doing. So being able to be compassionate with myself that I couldn't walk, because it was so unreasonable that I was mad that I couldn't walk and go do the exercise. But that's how I felt. And, thinking about it and then just going, here's what you can do. So just do this in the interim until the point where you are back to near 100% was really helpful for me. So we've got another question for Dr. Jung, and it says, a senior living alone has fallen, tripped in an outing, and since then stopped going out. How can I encourage them to go out, or should they be encouraged to do this?
Yeah, and I think so personal stories are going to come in here. My mom, who is 78, and has severe osteoarthritis, kyphosis, the whole bit, and she had a fall and broke a lot of bones. Long story short, this is the perfect scenario. Maybe this is my mom, I don't know. But anyways, the encouragement is, you need to keep moving, because if you don't move it, you lose it. That idea about hypertrophy that Mark talked about, the idea of balance, regulation, but for her, it's independence. And so the kicker is that insecurity has arisen, and refusal to use a walker is also there. So how do you feel safe? How do you encourage others who don't feel safe to keep moving, knowing that if they lessen their physical movement, then the problem perpetuates and exacerbates? And so for her and like many others, I'm sure it's about increasing movement in where she feels safe. So physiotherapist exercises in the home, working on balance, working on strength and mobility, working on actions that can make you feel more secure if you're living in an icy or wintry conditions in Canada, or anywhere. And then I'm not sure if people can see the chat here, but Dr. Tarnopolsky's comments are also fabulous in that, there needs to be some physiological checkups with anybody who's in that situation, just to assess if there's any underlying conditions that we need to be aware of that are causing the fall. I'm a big proponent of using aids to assist that individual, or similar to your story, Priya, that, what can I do in the meantime? It's not that I'm forcing my mom to use a walker for the rest of her life, just until it's not icy and the bones are healed.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great story that you shared with that personal experience. And just touching upon the insecurities, that is so real and such a, it was a huge component for me, because I felt so insecure to walk outside. and it was about the safety, all I could think of is if I fall, no one is around me, what is going to happen? Like, how would I be able to deal with that? So finding a safe place to then practice those little things that will help you to get to the next level in your recovery or your rehab, that really does go a long way. Thank you for that. So we've got another question, and I will address this to Dr. Tenakopolsky. And it says, do you see differences between access to exercise opportunities in rural versus urban communities?
Yeah, so in the rural community, often there can be limitations, for example, with no sidewalks. I have a home where I work, which is urban, and I'm up here in a rural setting. And I can tell you there was a huge debate when they went from the smaller garbage containers and the recycling containers that you could put in your car and drop off at the end of your driveway. And people were freaking out when they went to these big, huge containers that you have to roll all the way up. So for us, it's a 300-meter trek out to the edge of the road, and there's no sidewalks at all. So you go up and down the road here, and you're likely to get killed from people whipping around on these backcountry roads. So that's one of the issues, but there's ways around it. So in a rural community, you just have to be a little bit more creative, for lack of a better term, and find, pretty river trails, beautiful place to walk, just amazing. The other issue is sometimes activity centers. Certainly the YMCA has done a huge benefit to so many people in terms of access to safe and varied equipment for both endurance and resistance type of activity. And yet those are really only in, centers that are probably 40,000 people or above. And so those can be some of the issues. And certainly there's data that when COVID hit, the biggest group of people who decreased their physical activity were those who regularly went to a gym setting. And so what we always encourage is make sure you've got options at home. So when my wife and I, many, you can tell how old I am, probably 30, 40 years ago, when we had young kids, because of one of us had to stay home with the children, we set up a small gym, and it wasn't very expensive. It was like $800 for a reclining bike, some weights, and one person always stayed home and did their workout. And I think there's many ways to be creative, especially now what we've seen with the pandemic, so that you can work out at home, either if you're an isolated rural community or at home without access to the gym and other places to go. Just got to be creative.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that advice. Yeah, being creative and, mixing it into the things that you like that is very much a key component from what all of the panelists have told us today is you need to love what you're doing. It's much easier to exercise if you actually enjoy it. And the motivations behind that are positive for you and uplifting to let you do the work and do it consistently, whatever consistently looks like. So I had one more question, and this question was going to Dr. Saveston, and it was about when you talked about being compassionate to yourself. So how do you balance that compassion versus complacency, right? Where now you're just making excuses, but you think you're just being compassionate to yourself. We do all have things that happen to us, but sometimes we may just think of anything not to be the reason why we stick to, the journey towards the goal that we have when it comes to physical activity. How can we identify that line of complacency versus compassion?
Yeah, it's a great question. The research in self-compassion, and Dr. Jung could also weigh in on this, but the research in self-compassion more generally always has that balance between complacency and self-compassion, especially in the context of exercise and physical activity. One of the key elements of guiding along that balance is intentionality. So, making sure that there's an intention to your actions and that you don't fall into, more of an implicit, sort of just doing it for the sake of doing it. That's the core element that sort of separates this complacency from self-compassion, is an intentional, almost driven, goal-oriented focus on yourself. And without that, it can certainly become, more implicit and complacent, for lack of another term, in that divide. But I would also welcome Dr. Jung to answer on that question as well.
Yes, please, Jennifer.
Yeah, I'll just chime in to say one quick thing, and that's is it's an assumption, but when we look at the data, we find this cool effect happening, and this is some work I'm doing on self-compassion and exercise adherence with a colleague at University of Manitoba, Dr. Strachan, and what we found is that when we teach people to be more self-compassionate, their frequency of exercise throughout 6 months actually increases, and then as an offshoot of that, they actually become more fit than individuals who go through a program but aren't taught self-compassion skills. So we see this opposite, where you say to people, be kind to yourself, listen to what your body really feels, and what you find joy in, like you said, Priya. And what happens is they end up exercising more. They find the joy in the movement, like everyone's spoken of here today. And because they're not giving that harsh whip to themselves, if you will, they tend to exercise more frequently. So it's almost this opposite reaction or happening when I think we get this knee-jerk reaction that when you suggest things like being kind to yourself, people think, oh, you're just being soft. And I really think the opposite happens when it comes to exercise adherence.
Awesome. Thank you for adding to that. Dr. Tenopolsky, do you want to add to that as well before we close off?
Whoops. Yeah, I mean, I think, what was I thinking during all of that? Certainly, when one exercises, the other thing too is the incredible feeling that you get afterwards. And I think about my dog. She has a short-term memory, and when she comes back, she's so happy afterwards. It's just incredible. But unlike humans, she doesn't think before she goes out again that she's going to have that great feeling. And I think that just the feeling you get afterwards just makes you feel so fantastic. And I think once people do things that they enjoy, that feeling just becomes a positive feedback cycle, and just encourages a fun enjoyment and compliance. So people are more likely to do it.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight. Thank you again to all of the panelists, Dr. Tenopolsky, Dr. Yoon, and Dr. Saveston. I definitely learned so much today that I'm going to take and execute with all of the goals that I now have. And the plan is to be kind to myself and actually set achievable goals and make sure my motives are actually in the right place. So thank you again for sharing with us today and for being part of our panel. I would like to turn over the mic now to Celia.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Priya for being such a wonderful moderator. I found not only was this so enlightening, but just super, super encouraging. I love the whole theme of self-love, self-care, and fun. So I hope that you enjoyed today's discussion as well. We would love to hear from you. So please share your feedback with us and let us know what you'd like to see from us next. So there will be a link in the chat box, and it will also be emailed to you if you subscribe to our event. And if you can, consider supporting RCI Science's free programming. You can visit rciscience.ca/donate for more information. Details about all of our upcoming events can also be found on our website at rciscience.ca/what's-on. And for early updates on what's coming up next, you can subscribe to our newsletter. There will be a link in the chat box as well. And thank you again for joining us, spending your Sunday afternoon with us. It's a very lovely day where I am. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.